Good evening, visitors. Welcome to the Australian War Memorial's last post ceremony. My name is Nathan Boyd, and joining us today from the Royal Australian Navy is Commander Darren Green. Tonight, we commemorate the 80th anniversary of the Japanese midget submarine attack on Sydney Harbour on the night of the 31st of May, 1942. 80 years ago, the Allies were experiencing their darkest moments of the Second World War. Australia was facing the gravest hour in the history of our nation. In just a few months, the forces of Imperial Japan had swept across Southeast Asia and the Pacific. Singapore, the Netherlands, East Indies, the Philippines and Burma had all fallen to the Japanese. Areas of Australia's mandated New Guinea had been invaded and occupied by the enemy, and Darwin and Northern Australia were under attack. The Japanese now planned their most audacious attack on the mainland of Australia. On the night of the 29th of May, 5 large Japanese submarines lurked some 60 kilometres off Sydney Harbour. In the early hours of the next morning, a reconnaissance flight over Sydney reported battleships and cruisers moored in the harbour. During the afternoon of the 31st of May, the Japanese submarines moved to within 11 kilometres of Sydney Harbour. At around 4:30 p.m, 3 mother submarines each deployed a midget submarine. Armed with 2 torpedoes each, the 2-man vessels began their approach. All 3 would enter Sydney Harbour. A midget submarine became entangled in the anti-torpedo net suspended between George's Head and Green Point. Its crew detonated the submarine's demolition charges, destroying the vessel and killing themselves in the blast. Another midget submarine attacked the American heavy cruiser, USS Chicago. Its torpedoes missed the cruiser, but one exploded against the harbour wall at Garden Island, sinking the depot ship HMAS Cuttable. A converted ferry, Cuttable was used as accommodation, and 19 Australians and 2 British men were killed in the blast. The midget submarine then disappeared into the night. A 3rd midget submarine was spotted and attacked by the Royal Australian Navy, and it was sunk in Taylor Bay. Its crew committed suicide. The wrecks of the midget submarines were recovered from the harbour and were later combined and publicly displayed as a single submarine. The fate of the midget submarine that sunk Cuttable was not discovered until November 2006, when its wreck was finally located off Sydney's northern beaches. The Japanese attack on Sydney Harbour was a night of unparalleled confusion and panic. The attack lasted for hours. The harbour was lit up by searchlights, while noise of guns firing from cruisers, Chicago, as well as smaller Royal Australian Navy corvettes and other craft. The detonation of depth charges rang out across the harbour. The 3 mother Japanese submarines remained off Sydney's coast for several days, although one returned a few days later to shell northern Sydney, while another attacked Newcastle. The Japanese raid on Sydney Harbour was conducted at the same time as similar attacks on Madagascar, and the attacks were intended to act as a diversion ahead of their operations against Midway. The ability to conduct and carry out these daring raids across the Pacific and Indian Oceans demonstrated the reach and power of the Imperial Japanese Navy. In Japan, the raids on Sydney Harbour were celebrated as a significant victory and a huge propaganda coup. Although the Japanese never conducted such a bold raid on mainland Australia, attacks in the north continued for many months ahead. The year 1942 truly was Australia's darkest hour. Tonight, we're honoured to acknowledge staff from the United States Congress. We welcome the veterans who have served, those that are still serving, and the families that love and support them. We acknowledge the members of RSL Services Clubs Association, RSL Victoria, and RSL Queensland who are watching the broadcast of this ceremony across Australia. During this evening's ceremony, wreaths will be laid at the base of the pool of reflection by visitors to the memorial. If you're able, please stand and join in singing the national anthem. If you're able, please be seated. The Australian War Memorial was a vision of Charles Bean, Australia's First World War official historian. Bean landed with the Australian troops on Gallipoli and stayed with them at the front through to the end of the war. The idea of this national memorial and museum came to him at Pozières, France, in the depths of the bloody fighting of 1916. Bean's idea was that this would be a place where family and friends could mourn loved ones buried in faraway places. It would also be a place that could help all Australians understand what these men and women had endured and what they had done for us. Bean's vision, to which we remain true, is best expressed as inscribed in the entrance of the memorial's galleries. Here is their spirit, in the heart of the land they loved, and here we guard the record which they themselves made. Tonight, we'll read the story behind just one of those in the Roll of Honour, which lists the names of more than 102,000 men and women who gave their lives for us in war and on operation for more than a century. But first, we present a lament, Flowers of the Forest. Wreaths or floral tributes will now be laid at the base of the pool of reflection.
Today, we remember and pay tribute to Petty Officer Leonard Walter Howroyd. Leonard Howroyd was born on 25 August 1915 in the Melbourne suburb of Richmond. Known as Len, he was the only son of plasterer Walter Howroyd and his wife Winifred. Len grew up around the suburbs of Melbourne before joining the Royal Australian Navy at the age of 17. Having enlisted for a period of 12 years, Len Howroyd began his training at the Navy depot HMAS Cerberus. On completion of his training, he joined the crew of HMAS Australia and in 1934 was promoted to able seaman. In 1935, Howroyd was posted to HMAS Penguin at Garden Island in Sydney. Later that year, he married Joyce Kurtz. They made their home in Penrith and soon welcomed two daughters, Angela and Delphine. Over the years which followed, Howroyd was posted to a variety of ships before joining the crew of HMAS Hobart as leading seaman in late September of 1938. After travelling to the ship's namesake city in Tasmania the following year, Howroyd spent the next 6 months at sea, undertaking exercise off Australia's east coast and a deployment through the South Pacific. Hobart returned to Australia in August and was patrolling Bass Strait when war was declared in September of 1939. With Australia now at war with Germany, Hobart returned to her home port of Sydney. In October, Hobart sailed to the East Indies via Darwin and Singapore, where patrols off Sunda Strait and the west coast of Sumatra were conducted in company with the British light cruiser HMS Birmingham. Over the months that followed, Hobart undertook escort duties for Allied ships and that year spent the first Christmas of the war at sea. In May 1940, Howroyd was promoted to petty officer. A month later, Italy entered the war as Hobart was operating off the coast of Yemen. It was here that Howroyd experienced his first hostile engagement, when Hobart fired on Italian aircraft during a raid on Yemen's capital, Aden. In August, Hobart assisted the evacuation of Berbera in the British Somaliland as 3 columns of Italian troops advanced overland towards the port. During this time, Hobart contributed to the defence of the harbour, repelling a number of enemy air attacks as they ferried Allied troops away from the city. Following the evacuation, Hobart continued escort and patrol duties in the Red Sea until the end of the year, when she returned to Australia. Howroyd spent the first half of 1941 on operations around Australia. Returning to the Red Sea in July that year, Hobart again engaged the enemy. Howroyd and Hobart then operated from Alexandria in Egypt, where they supported the campaign in the Western Desert at Bardia and Tobruk. Hobart also conducted operations around Cyprus, Malta and Syria, and frequently came under attack from enemy aircraft, somehow managing to avoid significant damage. In January 1942, Petty Officer Howroyd returned to Australia to undertake several months of advanced gunnery training at HMAS Cerberus. Completing his course in May 1942, Howroyd was offered a place in HMAS Perth. He declined this posting, however, remarking in a letter home, "I will wait for my own ship. She seems to have a charmed life." As Hobart was still at sea, Howroyd was posted back to the naval base at Garden Island, where he was billeted in the depot ship HMAS Cuttable, a former Sydney Harbour ferry being used as accommodation for ratings posted to Garden Island. Howroyd was on board Cuttable the night of 31 May 1942, when 3 Japanese midget submarines stole their way into Sydney Harbour to attack Allied warships. The first submarine became entangled in the harbour anti-submarine nets, forewarning an attack was underway. Its crew, unable to free themselves from the net, fired demolition charges which destroyed their craft. The second submarine entered the harbour, narrowly avoiding searchlights and gunfire from Allied ships. Its crew fired 2 torpedoes at the American cruiser USS Chicago before escaping the harbour. Both torpedoes missed their target. One struck the seawall at Garden Island and exploded just beneath HMAS Cuttable, causing the depot ship to sink while naval ratings were sleeping on board. One of those who survived the blast recalled the incident. "I went off to sleep and the next thing I remember was being flung out of my hammock by a terrific explosion. Water began to run over the bottom deck and the ship began to settle almost immediately. The men forward did not have a chance." Some on board were killed instantly by the blast, while others, caught in the wreckage, drowned. It took days to recover and account for those killed in Cuttable, which eventually totalled 21. Among their number was Petty Officer Leonard Howroyd. Len was buried with full naval honours on 4 June 1942. Today, his remains lie in the Rockwood necropolis beneath the inscription chosen by his family, which reads, "We have loved him in life, let us not forget him in death." Leonard Howroyd was 26 years old. His name is listed on the Roll of Honour to my left, among almost 40,000 Australians who died while serving in the Second World War. His photograph is displayed today beside the pool of reflection. This is but one of the many stories of service and sacrifice told here at the Australian War Memorial. We now remember Petty Officer Leonard Walter Howroyd, who gave his life for us, for our freedoms, and in the hope of a better world.
Please stand for the reading of the ode and the sounding of the last post.
They have no grave but the cruel sea. They have no flowers by their head. A rusty hulk is their tombstone on the ocean floor. On every occasion, they have no grave but the cruel sea. No flowers lay at their head. A rusting hulk is their tombstone, a fast on the ocean bed. On every occasion, whilst caps afloat, there are no crosses, row on row. But those that sleep beneath the sea, we will remember them, lest we forget. They shall grow not old as we the left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun, and in the morning, we will remember them.
We will remember them.
Lest we forget.
Lest we forget. We leave you this evening with the words of the memorial's founder, Charles Bean. Many a man lying out there at Pozières or in the low scrub at Gallipoli with his poor, tired senses barely working through the fever of his brain has thought in his last moments, well, it's over. But in Australia, they will be proud of this. Ladies and gentlemen, girls and boys, that concludes the last post ceremony. On behalf of the Director and staff, thank you for visiting the Australian War Memorial today and for your continued support of the Memorials Development Project. We wish you all a very pleasant evening.